Welcome back. Brussels authorities set off a political firestorm on Tuesday by ordering the shutdown of a gathering of European politicians attending a conservatism conference in a move that sent shudders of anxiety about freedom of speech around the world. The conference had already been blighted as a group of Belgian mayors pressured two booked venues to renege on hosting the event. Keynote speakers at the National Conservatism Conference, including Nigel Farage and former Home Secretary Suella Braverman, and also Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban was giving an address on the second day of the event. After police had surrounded the building on the first day to prevent entry, lawyers worked overnight to win an emergency court hearing which allowed the event to proceed on the second day. Should municipal and city authorities be allowed to clamp down on the freedom of speech of their political opponents? Joining me to discuss this is one of the event's organisers, Professor Frank Furedi, the Executive Director of MCC Brussels and an Emeritus Professor of Sociology at the University of Kent. Frank, welcome to GB News.
Pleasure.
A little detail, but fairly quickly, if you would. As I understand it, you're wrestling with three different authorities and also three different venues. Is that correct?
Yes, I think we had a really nice venue. And when I went to talk to the director, I was told that the mayor has decided that he wouldn't allow us to speak because he didn't like the views of the people who were going to be presented there. Afterwards, we got a second venue and everything was all right. And just in the evening beforehand, the same thing happened. The local mayor, this was in Etterbeek, a part of Brussels, told us that it wasn't going to happen. We basically went to the courts and the judge decided that the venue director was right and we had to move on. We finally found a third venue, and the big difference there was that the man who was the director of this venue believed in free speech, so he let us have the venue. But then the local mayor there raised the stakes, called in the police, and insisted that unless we leave straight away, everybody will be subject to some kind of criminal charge. Nevertheless, the good thing was we did manage to stay. The venue director indicated that he would back us up in this. But when we left, we were told that we couldn't come back next day because the mayor issued another order saying that this was prohibited for this conference to occur. And that's really when we went to the courts. To be honest, I was totally depressed that night when I went to bed. I thought we would lose the case. But fortunately, out of the first two judges supported the mayor, but the third judge in what is the Supreme Court of Brussels backed us up, and therefore the conference could go ahead. I should say that the reason why I think this occurred was because the Prime Minister of Belgium came out in support of the conference and said it was really beyond the pale in a democratic society not to allow the freedom of assembly.
When you had all these people telling you either that you couldn't use a venue or that your conference wasn't allowed at all, what was the reason? Presumably they didn't say it was because of the views that were being expressed there, or did they?
Well, the second mayor was really explicit. He actually boasted on the news that he is very proud of the fact that he does not allow people with our kind of views, whatever that meant, to be able to have a platform to speak. The other mayors basically said that they were worried about Antifa coming and creating a demonstration and there will be a public order issue. But when I investigated this and I asked the mayors and their representatives, well, why don't you do your duty and send the police to protect the venue from the Antifa? They basically then kept quiet and said, no, that's not going to happen. And they more or less indicated that they too were against the politics of the conference. In the end, even the mayor of Brussels was honest enough to acknowledge to his people that the reason why he was so determined to prevent us from having a meeting was because of the political outlook that we had that challenged the views of the socialist mayor.
And just to remind viewers, I mean, many of the people that you had invited to come and speak were people who've been elected in their own countries. I'm thinking of people like Suella Braverman. I'm thinking of Nigel Farage, who has been a member of the European Parliament, of course, had an enormous impact on British politics. And Viktor Orban, who has been elected and re-elected. Many people may not care for the Prime Minister of Hungary, but he's certainly an elected person.
And in addition, we had about 15 to 16 members of the European Parliament who were also elected, and they really live in Brussels. And you would imagine that Brussels, being the head of the capital of the EU, would allow elected members of its own parliament to have an opportunity to voice their views. So I think what was very interesting about this is that the mayors overplayed their hands, so that because they overplayed their hands, all public opinion became entirely on our side. It was so evident, so transparent, that this was really an attempt to use the police instead of arguments to react to our conference, that it was a real direct threat, and it is still a direct threat to the freedom of assembly and to free speech.
Yes, I wanted to ask you about what you think are the consequences of all of this. I mean, you've now made the point that they may have overplayed their hand. Does that mean at the end of this that it's less likely that events like this will be banned? Or on the other hand, do you think that municipal leaders will spy some sort of precedent here, because they can do their posturing, they can display their own political goods for the public to see? So how do you think it leaves it? Is it more likely or less likely that there'll be future bans?
I'm fairly sure that this was, in a sense, the first of a series of bans that are going to occur. I think this was a trial run. What I'm really worried about is that if the future of democracy and free speech depends on the ruling of one judge, and you have to remember that 3 other judges ruled against us, then democracy is in big trouble. And what I'm really worried about as well is that there seems to be a climate of opinion, a polarized sentiment, where the local newspapers are saying it's such a shame that the mayors scored an own goal. And when you examine the word own goal, what they really mean by that is that only if they had been more subtle in the way that they behaved. They're not critical of what he's done, what these mayors have done. They're merely critical of the manner in which they carried out their action. And what worries me absolutely is that a strong body of political opinion amongst established politicians believes that it is okay to cancel conferences and to crush the people's opinions and prevent the freedom of assembly. The democracy actually depends on these foundational values.
Professor Frank Furedi, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us today.